Hi, everybody. Tonight, our guest is Corinne Gisel. She is co-founder of Common Interest, a nonprofit design research practice operating at the intersection of knowledge production, exchange, and mediation. After graduating with a BA in graphic design from the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, Corinne went on to pursue an MA in cultural publishing from the Zurich University of the Arts. This led to co-authoring a book in 2016 with curator Nina Paim and artist Amelia Bergmark called Taking a Line for a Walk, Assignments in Design Education. In 2018, Corinne solidified her partnership with longtime collaborator Nina Paim, and Common Interest was born. This design research practice deploys design in order to cultivate understanding by communicating socially relevant insights on social justice, untold or marginalized stories, and environmental issues. Using design research as an activist tool for issue advocacy, collectivity building, and fostering cross-cultural exchange, their work manifests itself in a variety of formats, including texts, publications, exhibitions, workshops, events, and more. In 2019, Common Interest received a Swiss Design Award in the category of Design Mediation for curating the exhibition Department of Non-Binaries at the inaugural Fikra Graphic Design Biennial in Sharia, UAE. Please welcome Corinne Gisel.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you, Dina, for the introduction, and thank you, Molly, for having me. And a little shout out also to Vera Sacchetti, who shares a studio with us in Switzerland, and she is an alumna of this program, and she actually made the connection. And as well, it's great to be back. I actually did do the summer intensive, I think it was 2015, and I've learned a lot, and I made a lot of contacts that I still carry very dearly today, so thank you for that. So I'm going to talk about, this is really like talking from our practice. I'm not going to be talking about like activism on a theoretical level. This is really something that after 2 years of having this practice that we realized more and more so how what we do is not just close to activism, but it is a kind of an activist practice. And that really comes from like a year ago, we would have maybe said like, it's close to activism or it's close to it. But after a year of doing these projects and also going through these experiences, yeah, it is an activist practice with all its small victories here and there, but also its difficulties. So as Dina said, I run Common Interest together with Nina Paim. We are a nonprofit, and we call ourselves a design research practice. It's really hard to describe what we do, but we feel like design research is really at the core of what we do. We are based in Switzerland, in Basel, to be precise. And we started basically in 2018. Right now, it's mostly the two of us, me and Nina Paim. But whenever our finances allow and when projects need it, we also bring in other people. I also want to say here, we really do not want to kind of like continue the precarization that goes on in the cultural sector. So that's why we're also really careful with involving more and more people. One collaborator that we've worked with is Naz Nadav, a Jordanian Lebanese designer and researcher who grew up and currently lives in the United Arab Emirates. Another is Paula Minel-Gaite, a Lithuanian and British-born and based designer and researcher. Then we also worked with Anne Kern, a Swiss designer and researcher who studied in Lausanne and currently lives in Zurich. And Maria Chiara De Leo, an Italian designer and researcher who is currently completing her MA degree in Urbino in Italy. And yeah, it's mostly the two of us still right now doing the work day in, day out. So I also want to kind of like introduce the two of us a little bit and situate also who we are and what we do and why we do what we do and in which context we do what we do. So I was born, or no, I was not born there. I grew up in a Swiss town called Kloten, which is where the largest airport of Switzerland is actually located. It started out a long, long time ago as like a Roman settlement, and then it was mostly a rural village, until it became kind of like after the Second World War, it became the site of the largest commercial airport in Switzerland. Nina, on the other hand, was born in Brazil, in a small town up north the state of Rio de Janeiro called Nova Friburgo, which means in Portuguese, New Fribourg, and it's actually a reference to a Swiss city. So that already kind of like hints at that Nova Friburgo was originally founded by Swiss settler immigrants. And back then, Switzerland was a poor country that was in 1818, and Brazil was still a colony of Portugal. And in an effort to whiten Brazil, the Portuguese crown started recruiting Europeans to populate the land. And within that effort, over 2,000 Swiss citizens came by boat, mostly from the French-speaking part, so that's where Fribourg is located. Their trip was covered, they were given free land, and they also received an allowance for the first year. So this is a form of settler colonialism, and it is actually something that a lot of Swiss people do not know about. A lot of Swiss people feel like, state again and again that like Switzerland has no colonial history or no ties with any kind of like colonial past, which is simply not true. I grew up in this like multi-family complex, while Nina grew up in a very Swiss-looking chalet over in Brazil. So that's just a little hint. This is me with my brother, my older brother. Both my parents, remember we lived in a city where the airport is, both of my parents worked for the Swiss airline, like the largest Swiss airline called Swissair, that actually in 2001 was close to bankruptcy, and it was, it was a really difficult situation. A lot of people were fearing for their jobs, including my parents and their pensions, and thanks to a national bailout scheme, actually a lot of that was saved, and it kind of continued under a new name, which it still has today, Swiss, and as a new company. And I'm the younger of us two, and actually my brother now lives here in the States, and we also have family in Sweden, and meanwhile, Nina grew up as a single child, and both of her parents are potters, ceramists, and her dad is also an academic, so she also lived in France for a while. And we ended up meeting at this school, the Gerrit Rietveld Academie in Amsterdam, where we both studied graphic design and graduated together in 2012. This is us. And somehow after graduation, we both moved to Berlin. We were already sometimes doing projects together, and I was doing an underpaid internship in Berlin, and Nina was doing an underpaid internship in Berlin, as so many people do, unfortunately, and have to do. And it somehow happened that in the end, we both ended up back in Switzerland again. I went on to do an MA in cultural publishing at the University of the Arts in Zurich, and Nina did an MA in design research at the University of the Arts in Bern. And yeah, we were, over these years, like 8 years of knowing each other and doing projects together, 8 or I don't know, I didn't really do the math, but a lot of years. We felt like, okay, let's try to kind of actually bring our two separate freelance practices together and do something together. And it kind of starts with finding a name and buying a domain nowadays. And then we actually kind of made it official when we were giving a workshop, like a semester year-long workshop in Valence in France, and we had a kind of inaugural cake that we shared with our students. So we had a first-year anniversary cake last year, and we finally had a second-year anniversary cake this year. We'll hopefully continue the tradition. And yeah, here we are now in Switzerland, and this is the moment to also kind of state a few facts, more life facts about us. So Nina has a family. She's married to Fabian, who is Swiss, and this is actually them like just on their way to finally going back to Brazil to visit her family after many years. And this is me working with a queer activist organization, doing some brainstorming for something. So Nina is a foreigner in Switzerland. She doesn't have a Swiss passport, and she is read as a Latina woman, and that kind of influences her daily life. She is also a young mother that influences her life as well. Both of us are actually queer. Nina is bisexual. I identify as pansexual, and I also don't identify completely. On like the binary end of female, so I use the pronouns mostly she, her, but I do actually identify on like a genderqueer spectrum. And that kind of leads to also us experiencing Switzerland in a certain way. So this is Switzerland, landlocked between all of these European countries, tiny, about under 8 million, under 8 million inhabitants like nationwide. It's a confederation. It's made up of individual states, 26 in total. They're called cantons. And the political system is kind of, a lot of people know that, but it's a direct democracy in a way. So that means that both on a local level, but also on a national level, Swiss citizens, nowadays also women, we vote about pretty much everything. And it also means that whenever government passes a new law, if you gather enough signatures, you can make a referendum, and then it goes to like a popular vote. So that also means that has consequences, that it's also making the system, it can make the system rather slow. And for example, Swiss women were only given the right to vote in 1971. A lot of people don't know that. And this is actually kind of like a couple of like posters that were made for that final vote, but that doesn't mean like the struggle for women's suffrage in Switzerland goes far back. Like it started kind of like at the beginning of the 20th century, when like the first what are they called? Swiss Association for Women's Suffrage was their name. Kind of they founded themselves, and this is actually a poster from another vote that was held in 1950 when it didn't get passed. Them kind of saying everywhere in Europe, women have the right to vote, just not in Switzerland. So this illustrates that. It's also 2019. It was by UNICEF in a report. It was ranked as the least family-friendly country in Switzerland. That is partially also because we've only had, where's that fact, sorry. here. Paid maternity leave was only introduced in 2004, and it's still the shortest in Europe. And there's, as of today, basically, dads only get 1 day off following the birth of their child, which for Europe is very uncommon. Usually, like, paid family leave is much more expanded in Switzerland. And this also goes back a bit to kind of the power of these votes. Maybe you remember this. That was quite a few years ago, but it's more here to illustrate kind of like the power of also that like posters and public propaganda can have in these like national votes. This was an initiative, and that's another thing that in a direct democracy, like anyone with like enough, again, with enough signatures, you can like make a proposal for a new law or a change in a law, and then it goes to a popular vote. And this was the like right-wing parties wanting to ban the construction and building of minarets in mosques in Switzerland, and they actually succeeded. So Swiss people actually voted yes in the end. I was living in Amsterdam at the time, and it was absolutely shocking to me. But you see here these posters. This is actually like a display, like a picture from the Zurich main train station. And like these right-wing the problem is, of course, if you can influence people's opinions in the most efficient way, you have a big sway over how they will vote. And the sad truth is that a lot of the times the right-wing parties have more money at their disposal to actually run these really expensive campaigns in very public places. And they also make very, very polemic and, well, racist propaganda. And this is actually a report from 2015 where they said that like 1 in 4 Swiss residents has xenophobic attitudes. And that just also ties in with what I said before. Then when we come to LGBTQIA+ rights, this is a report published by ILGA Europe, the European chapter of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, and Switzerland, in like their latest report, is ranked 28th, I think. So of like 49 countries, so in the second, like at the bottom half. And that is mostly due to LGBTQIA+ people not having equal rights and not having enough protective rights. So, for example, there's still no same-sex marriage in Switzerland. You can have like a registered partnership, but that doesn't give you the same rights and the same protective rights from the side of the law, and the only way that you can have children together officially is by like one of the parents has to give birth to that child naturally, and then the biological parent has to step back from their rights to parenthood, and then your same-sex partner, for example, can adopt that child. This is so far the only way. There is now like push towards changing that and actually having kind of like marriage for not like for everyone, but that's only kind of now. And there's also no third gender option. And trans people still have to go through a lot of legal hoops to change their gender, name, and have access also to medical transition. And intersex people, when it comes to intersex rights, this is really in the very beginning, and there's still a lot of gender assignment surgery soon after birth. And actually, 1 week ago, there was a big vote happening in Switzerland. This was again like an example of the Swiss Parliament actually wanted to introduce, wanted to expand the anti-racism law also for sexual identity, so that it would become illegal for people to discriminate the whole group of non-heterosexual people. So you were already, you would, if it would have like pertained to you as a individual person, you were already protected by the law, but as soon as someone would, for example, say all homosexuals, that would have not been illegal. And that was basically the government kind of wanted to have that law passed, but then it went to someone like the young right-wing party and Christian fundamentalists basically made a referendum, and it went to a popular vote. And it did get passed, but I was also part of the effort, the whole LGBTQIA+ community really made a lot of effort to exactly also make sure that we would have a lot of public representation of our issues, both through posters. In the end, like in the beginning, they didn't have enough money actually to make any posters, but they ended up being able to raise a lot of money through fundraising. And in the end, actually everywhere you could see these like pink posters. So that was an amazing thing also to see. And it did get passed, so that's great. But on the same day, there was actually a brutal attack on a gay couple in Zurich as well. So that also talks to kind of there have been kind of in the last 3 months, and no, that's an older article, sorry. But in the past few months, LGBTQ organizations have registered more and more homophobic attacks. And that also talks to another problem, that there is currently whenever there's an attack, it so far would not have been able to be recorded as a hate crime based on sexuality or based on gender identity. So there is simply no statistics on these crimes actually on a national level. Okay, so this was an introduction into the lovely place of Switzerland and to our life realities. And that is also to say that what the work that we do doesn't just come from out of nowhere. You know, it's we mostly do work in Switzerland, but not only, but it's of course informed by our life realities as well. And now I'm gonna kind of talk about a couple of projects and just make a few points that we realized, almost strategies or things that we again and again do through our projects, and illustrate them by a lot of some projects. But of course, a lot of the projects kind of use these strategies in combination, you could say. And the first thing I want to point to is kind of something I would call navigating boundaries, or pushing boundaries, or trying to get as close to not exactly breaking a boundary, but yeah. In 2018, this is the exhibition that Dina mentioned, a new graphic design biennial in Sharjah in the United Emirates took place. And it was initiated by Mariam and Salem Al-Qasimi. He's shown here. And the Fikr Biennial was really the first graphic design biennial in the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia region. And this inaugural edition was curated by, here we have them in Nakim, Emily Swith, and Prem Krishnamurti. And they gave this first exhibition like the tongue-in-cheek title, Ministry of Graphic Design. So a kind of pseudo-governmental unit. And they sought to frame graphic design beyond its fast-paced kind of commercial definitions as a broader social and cultural field of action. And the ministry, which was, it used actually this old building, this abandoned building, which was used by a bank. So there were, I think, 5 floors or something like that, and each floor was a different department. 4 floors, I think. And so Emily, Na, and Prem asked us to create the department of non-binaries. And it was to like span one whole floor of that building and focus mostly on contemporary practices. And it actually ended up being the largest exhibition in the biennial, both in terms of size, but as well in number of participants. And I kind of want to just get that out of the way, as I'm sure a lot of you might know that any acts outside of heterosexual marriage are illegal in the United Arab Emirates, as is cross-dressing, for example. So you cannot openly talk about sexual identity, sexual orientation or gender identity or LGBTQIA+ politics. You just can't. So kind of censorship and legal ramifications is very real in the Emirates, and we had to kind of navigate that. And it was actually, when we were approached, it took us a long time to really decide whether we were okay with doing that. Kind of making an exhibition with this title in a context where you cannot specifically talk about gender or sexual identity. And before deciding, we actually talked to several like native Arabic speakers and also people from the region. And we also talked to Naz Nadaf, who I showed before, who was actually at the time doing an MA in Switzerland, but she grew up in the UAE. And as they kind of explained to us, and I mean, I don't speak Arabic, so I only know this from, of course, having talked to people who do speak it, that basically the term non-binary in Arabic doesn't officially denote or connote anything related to gender. It simply kind of refers to the wider definition of non-binary that we also know in English, that it's just like anything that is outside of a binary system of 0 and 1, or like, you know, anything that has like 2 components or can be categorized in very specific ways. But of course, the queer community or people informed about queer issues in that region do know the kind of reference to gender. So it's kind of like, it's a coded kind of reading. And when talking to Naz, she also said that she kind of encouraged us to do it because we were really like on the fence whether we could kind of like do that with like a clear conscience or not. But she said that she would think that especially in that environment, making an exhibition in that way, even if it couldn't overtly be about these issues, by the people within the LGBTQ+ community, it would be understood and it would be a really important kind of space and important message as well. So this is, you cannot read it, but basically what that meant was in our general framing, or official framing, we refer to non-binary in a very wide way. And do I have it in here somewhere? Wait, I'm going to read. So basically we said, the Department of Non-Binaries rejects smooth-edged simplicity and embraces the complexity that makes up today's landscape of graphic design, human culture, and personal identity. And it brought together a group of like 25, I think, group of international practitioners whose hybrid activities are hard to define. Their practices are in between, at the crossroads, or at the intersection of disciplines and cultures. Their work is many things at the same time. And what unites these practitioners from different creative and cultural fields is a desirable way of thinking and making, critically attuned to the power that tools of communication assume in a world that is increasingly designed. They are simultaneously conscious of their own ways of presentation and representation. So on that like first level, the Department of Non-Binary kind of understood design more as in a way as an adverb. So not a noun, not a verb, not a thing, not a specific like way of doing things, but a way of like a modality of kind of like looking at the world. And we had people who, a lot of the people that we had in there were also of like had like multinational trajectories that they would have like studied somewhere and then, or grown up somewhere, studied somewhere and now work somewhere else. They would often like in their practice like cross kind of disciplinary boundaries. And however, like in their bios, they could identify in the discipline the way that they wanted. Like some like would say they're an artist, some would say they're designers, some would say they're researchers, whatever. That being said, of course, there is one thing that we couldn't do, which was include anyone who was openly identifying as non-binary, because that would have exactly been kind of something that would not have been past censorship. So we kind of try to still make as political and also queer an exhibition as possible within these constraints. And I'm just I cannot like talk about all of the works, there's really a lot of them. But it started with a work by Naz Nadaf, which was actually also a hint to kind of, ticking these boxes on like forms. And you could kind of like choose a lot of different, you were allowed to pick several in a way. You could have like, chosen like a lot of different professional descriptors for what you do. And then there was also kind of almost like a museum within the exhibition that was curated by Rasha Dakak and Ilham Namwar, which was called Bain, which is Arabic for in between. And they actually made a collection of artifacts that are often designed anonymously, so souvenirs, prayer mats. What else did we have? Yeah, certain kind of like just socks that would, oftentimes would not even be considered quote unquote design, but they kind of like exactly wanted to bring that into the exhibition and bring that into discussion. This is a work by Lauren Furter, which this is Speaking Volumes, an ongoing hybrid research project about feminist publishing practices between art and activism. And here, for example, we translated the title page of the book. Now I don't remember the title. But there was, like, just as an anecdote, there was the word feminist in there. And translating it with someone who, like, into Arabic, you don't have the word feminist in Arabic. So even that already had to kind of like be, yeah. This is the work of Christopher Benton called LLC Redux, or A Great Place for Great People to Do Great Work, which was a totem of stacked light boxes that feature the small businesses that make the neighborhood of Satwa in Dubai one of the most vibrant, and it's also endangered community. This is the work by Sina Fakour, who grew up in Iran, and this is kind of a work superimposing the 3 calendars that are used in Iran: the Persian calendar, the Islamic calendar, and the Gregorian calendar. And then you kind of moved into a space where you had here the work by Lisania Cruz called Flowers for Immigration, in which she invited undocumented bodega flower workers to participate in making a flower arrangement in response to Donald Trump's immigration policy. In the middle is actually like a site-specific installation by artist Manuela Eichner called Monstera Deliciosa, so the typical tropical plant common to Brazil that now can be seen everywhere. And she made that specifically on the spot. Around there was also kind of like a reading lounge with magazines. And then we also had the work by Alexandra Bell, specifically her piece, A Teenager with Promise Annotated, which is part of her counter-narrative series in which she edits New York Times articles and alters headlines and changes images and redacts text to reveal oppressive patterns in news reportage and society at large. So the way that we tried to like make a queer exhibition was also like queer in a wider sense again, for example, that there was not one right way to walk through the exhibition. Like seeing this, like there wasn't, you could like walk through it in many different ways. There was also, we kind of placed works in a way that whenever you would see one work, you would also see another. You almost never saw one work completely in isolation. So it was always like kind of in conversation with another piece. And then as I mentioned also, I mean, we try to really include as many like queer identifying people as possible, as far as we like kind of censorship allowed. And then what we also did was actually the color coding is, if anyone recognizes this, this is the colors of the non-binary flag. So yellow, white, black, and purple, which we kind of like used as a color scheme throughout the exhibition. Okay. That was now a long kind of like explanation about that project. So within that, it's already kind of what we also did was kind of embrace a wider definition of design, which in and of itself is often already a statement to include much more. Also, for example, from a feminist perspective, include like practices that were like historically done by women, but that would not have been like framed under this kind of denominator of design and thereby not given enough attention. And what we also always try to do is kind of problematize design and break with this paradigm of like design as being this problem-solving process, and actually say that, well, design is also implemented in creating problems and perpetuating problems. And that has to be addressed as well. We do that especially also, I think this is something that we do in almost all of our projects, but we also did that specifically in an educational framework, where this is, for example, a project we called Objects of Interest. That was a semester-long class in France with an MA design, graphic design class, and we kind of formed a design investigation unit. And they had to choose kind of an object that they would suspect of having committed a crime. And we didn't mean crime in like the narrow legal sense, but it could be a social crime in a way, like racism, or it could be an environmental crime, or kind of a economical crime, or whatever. And they had to find their own like objects that they wanted to investigate. So then they actually also had to prove their cases. They couldn't just say it. They had to find research on it, or they had to produce research and data on it, and actually find an argumentation for, yes, this product, like the avocado, is really does, like, you know, there's like high food gentrification and other disasters, or we had stereotypes, gender stereotypes within toys, or I can show a few also, like using design to fuel the kind of sensationalism in news reporting. Here, this was also one student who looked at like the many crimes that like Snow White and the other Disney princesses are like committing, so that they're not that innocent, as the title kind of says. Or this was a conversation on based around objects that kind of embody the like whiteness. And they actually, all of these students, they all wrote. Most of them wrote in English and in French, and they produced videos, and we made an exhibition in the end. So it was kind of like mind-blowing how much they were able to do. And that kind of like goes back, like also links back to another thing that I want to say that we try to do, especially when we teach, is kind of defy power structures of knowledge. In the sense of like, we want the students to, we could have just told them what to investigate, for example, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted them to have kind of an agency to decide themselves what they actually wanted to investigate. And we also, right away from the very beginning, kind of started by saying, look, there's gonna be a point where you are gonna know more than we do. And that's okay, and that's good. And that we almost were in a way, like I said, more like an investigation unit. And together we kind of produced all this knowledge. And we used kind of the metaphor of being detectives to also kind of like unlink or dismantle also a bit this kind of authority that comes with suddenly you having had a more practice-based design education and then having to do more academic work or more journalistic work. And if you don't have that experience, it's a very kind of, I mean, I had that even, like that you are afraid of because of this authority, of this kind of like these paradigms of knowledge. And we always try to break that. So this was the objects of interest. We also now just did a seminar on like the political world of colors that was similar in the sense of the students choosing a color that they wanted to investigate and look into kind of the very complex backgrounds of the meanings of these colors, or like how they're like connected with social power structures or economical power structures. And here we also, for example, invited, so they kind of really did their own research and then made like a presentation, very simple. They were BA students, so this was really like one of their first kind of like researchers they did on their own. We also invited the LGBT activist Toby Urech from Switzerland, who was actually working on that campaign that I mentioned in Switzerland, and he's also a historian. So he was talking about pink as a queer color and the history behind all of that. And that kind of brings me to a next point, that when doing this political work, it's important to also create alliances within the design community, but also within the activist community. And then, I mean, we always talked about kind of building community, but what that really meant, and that really only, we really only experienced it kind of more realistically when we were doing really projects last year. And for example, we made like a really small lecture series that was called Betweeners. I don't know if I have the title here. Well, it doesn't matter. But it was also, again, inviting people who are kind of like in between disciplines, kind of mediators, in between cultures, kind of continuing on that theme. And one of the practices we invited was Not a Muse, which is Silva Baum, Claudia Scher, and Leah Sivertsen, who have been looking into kind of gender, especially female underrepresentation within the graphic design discourse. They produced a book, but they also have like recently done like statistical analysis of design conferences together with the Ion Design contributor, God, I'm gonna get to her name. Madeleine Morley, yeah. And we did this, for example, this was a really small lecture we hosted in our own studio in Basel. And because of the issue, or because of the topic that we brought forward, and you have to understand that within Switzerland, even a couple of years ago, if you would say you're a feminist, people would look at you weirdly. And within the design community, basically, no one really talked about these things, like in depth or, yeah. Like a couple of years ago, I remember this experience, Nina and me going to like a public lecture, and we were not even asking difficult questions, but just like the obvious questions. And you can feel the silence afterwards. Like people didn't approach us afterwards. Switzerland has this really weird culture of being like polite, but that also stifles a lot of criticism and true criticism. So this was finally kind of an event that just brought this topic forward. And in the end, it was, I don't know, like 30 people maybe attended. And it just kind of naturally happened that it became kind of a safe space, suddenly, for especially women within the design community talking about feminist issues and things that they really experience in their own practice and in their own lives. So it kind of became this safe space without actually us, or a safer space at least, without us even necessarily intending to do so. But that also made it clear for us that specifically within Switzerland or Europe in general, like there isn't, it's now starting, but there hasn't been so much kind of like organizing around these issues specifically within the design discourse community. Or at least we felt very alone in Switzerland. So that also kind of led to when we randomly went to Berlin, and then, you know, like you start to have connections to other people and practices and initiatives that work with similar issues. And then we were like, let's go and have pizza together. And what started as like us just wanting to meet for pizza and talk about it, we felt like, wow, this is suddenly like kind of a gathering of so many people who work with similar issues. Why not just open it up? So we did that, and we made like a very simple post on Instagram, and it ended up being kind of this gathering in Berlin. So that also kind of brings me to the next point, that when working on these issues, you cannot do the work alone. You have to work together, and you have to also create bonds and create connections. And one recent project that we've also been doing, and this is mostly Nina was mostly involved in this, so it's difficult for me to talk about it, but it's a workshop for exhibition making and unmaking that we've kind of been working on together with the Dhaka Art Summit in Bangladesh. And it's kind of consisted of a cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary team. Nina on the far end there, representing kind of common interest. And then we had Hurera Shabin, a professor at the Brak University in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, who focuses on gender and also environmental issue. We had civil engineer Khan Mobinul Haq. We had freelance architect Inteza Shariar, Sasa Tosyan, who's also working for the Samdani Art Foundation, which is the organizing body for the Dhaka Art Summit. Diana Campbell-Betancourt, the artistic director of the Samdani Art Foundation and curator of the Dhaka Art Summit. Prem Krishnamurti, again, that we brought, like a collaboration that continued, exhibition maker, and also co-founder of workshops. And Dries Rodet, an architect, Belgian architect, working in Switzerland. And together they were looking into kind of how to create culturally rooted, ecologically sustainable, and socially responsible ways of doing exhibition displays. And just a note that, of course, kind of it's not just in Bangladesh where making exhibitions in a more ecological way is an issue. This is an issue for the whole art kind of complex in general, and also, for example, for Art Basel, one of the biggest art fairs, of course, happening in Basel. And this was kind of a co-design workshop that now concluded. It was now kind of concluded with this year's Dhaka Art Summit. But we see how this will continue. But it mostly consisted of a discovery phase, a bit of like in Bangladesh, and then the team kind of met in our studio at the time in Basel, really working, kind of also switching kind of positions and talking together and working with really like a model and thinking about how can you create other kinds of display that don't create so much waste, for example. Yeah. And Hurera Shabin has been doing kind of an analysis of the ecological footprint of the previous editions of the Dhaka Art Summit, and is now going to reevaluate what they were actually able to kind of like save with changes that they implemented. So that also kind of like leads me to kind of having hard facts, you know, that sometimes you really need to not just make kind of an argument that wants to touch the heart, but that presents like really hard facts. And last year there was a nationwide women's strike in Switzerland. I don't know if you've heard of it, in June, and even more so than like kind of the Women's March, like that didn't have such a, of course people gathered as also in Switzerland, but that didn't have so much pull actually. There wasn't this mass mobilization in Switzerland right after that. But what happened this summer, and it was kind of a reference to a national women's strike that happened around 20 years ago, there was kind of a huge mobilization of women and queer people within Switzerland that was really a concerted effort of like local activist groups that were mobilizing people, and it was also using purple as like a color, and they were really good at kind of like creating kind of like a system where it wasn't based on just like one group doing all of the work, but like all these different groups being able to kind of come together and create work that would have much more impact collectively. And at the time, so this happened on the 14th of June in all like the larger cities in Switzerland, also in Basel. And at the time was exactly the Art Basel, so the fair. And during that Art Basel fair is also the exhibition of the National Design Award in Switzerland. which we were nominated for, and then actually also won in the category, as mentioned, of mediation. And we wanted to use kind of our position of being inside of that design award to also make a statement, a feminist statement about the design award. So while like there were lots of events happening at, on that day of the Frauenstreik, we made like a little performance in a way, or a little event, which we called Pizzas of Inequality. And so this kind of started actually in collaboration with Depatriarchized Design, a feminist initiative run by Maya Ober and Anja Neidhardt. And they organized these labs, and we made like a first small workshop in Basel that was around that topic as well. And there actually in a group kind of talk, we decided, hey, the one thing that we should actually really analyze is this National Swiss Design Award, which has been existing since like the beginning of the 20th century. And today it actually gives out around 15 to 18 awards each year, each with a 25,000 Swiss francs prize money. So that is quite a substantial sum of money. Yeah, this was the little workshop we had, and of course, kind of informed by, the Guerrilla Girls, but also this is this report that Not Amused did together with Madeleine Morley, which is published in Ion Design on design conferences, and also Parlour, which is an initiative from Australia that creates statistics for concerning women representation in architecture specifically. We kind of wanted to create some hard facts and wanted to really count. And so this was a lot of number crunching between the four of us, so together with Depatriarchized Design. And we actually analyzed not only that year in which we won, so that was, you can guess, yellow is male, red is female, gender ratio of that award. And then we also look back at the last 20 years of the award. So yeah, that was this. This was also, there's a two-step process. So you're nominated, you go to an exhibition, you exhibit your work within like that space, and then you're actually, in the end, judged on your exhibition, and that's what decides who actually gets awarded in the end. So that was also a breakdown by category to see like how like certain disciplines are much more gendered in one direction or the other. Yeah, this was the whole 20 years that we looked at. So, and like all these 20 years, there were only 3 years where there was one like considerably more female awardees and others only a little bit. This was exactly 50-50, 2 years, but then the majority was, majority male awardees. Then we also looked into the jury, but I'm not showing that. We also looked at like multiple times, because you can get this award 3 times during your lifetime, basically. And that really shows that, it's mostly men who get awarded several times, which also amounts to more money over the course of a career. There's also a Grand Award, which is more like a Lifetime Achievement Award, which has only been existing for 12 years. We also looked at this, which is also tricky. And then there's a Jan Tschichold Award, which is an award for specifically bookmaking, achievement in bookmaking, and this is even more shocking. So I don't have pictures of the event, but we basically made this first assessment, like really statistical assessment of these last 20 years of this award, and presented it within the exhibition of the Design Awards on that day, in presence also of the coordinator of that award. And we baked like 3 of these like main pizza graphs into pizzas, And the male part was pizza bianca, and the female part was actually the one with tomato on it. So let me put it this way, we had to eat a lot of cheese. So it was also meant as like an embodied experience of actually having to kind of like really feel that. But at the same time, we presented these statistics and graphs, and it was not only pizza graphs, it was like really exhaustive kind of like statistical assessment. And we also talked about, okay, but now we know it's unequal, what could we do? Of course, this is not just a simple solution, but one of the things, there were several aspects talked about, or things that we should still look into further to understand the bigger kind of like complex of these inequalities better, but that also takes labor and time. But for example, the coordinator of that award actually ended up showing our stats to her bosses at the Swiss government. And they were actually quite, they haven't done those statistics themselves yet. They were going to, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. And then actually during that discussion, one of the things that came up was this thing of like, you get nominated, you go to the exhibition, and then you're actually judged on your exhibition. But we, for example, for our little exhibit, we spent 1,000 francs because you didn't get any technical support, you didn't get any kind of materials.
Could you just translate that into US?
It's more or less one-to-one, I would say. These, I mean,
Thank you.
yeah.
Understand.
And we said that already puts people who do not have those financial means at a disadvantage. So one of the things that they actually now implemented this year is that when you're nominated and you go to the exhibition, you are given 1,000 francs to create your exhibition. And they invited us back to do another thing this year as well. So this also is like we're trying, whenever we produce research or use existing research, we also really use design to communicate research findings in a creative and like inclusive way that also wants to not like stifle debate, that actually produce debate. This is a small installation we did at the Bauhaus. A lot of you people know that there was a centennial of the Bauhaus last year, and there were a lot of events, but there was one like a festival specifically at the Bauhaus Dessau, and we were invited to do something, and we brought in kind of like symbols from the queer community or queer activism, and just bringing that into already a design discourse is like a lot of people simply do not know a lot of these symbols. That was a really small thing, and that's actually just like an ongoing investigation that we're also engaging with. And I think a lot of what we do is also kind of like actually creating space. And as I mentioned before, like Switzerland has this like debate culture of like being polite, but it's also informed by this concept or this myth of Swiss neutrality, which goes back a long time. But of course, specifically during the Second World War, that was also a concept under which to protect Switzerland from kind of invasion, because it was surrounded by all these forces, and it was actually, until the very end, not invaded, but it could have easily been at some point. So they were saying they were neutral, but of course a lot of us know today that they also made a lot of profit from Jewish, like dealing with Jewish gold. And they were actually also censoring a lot of things. So there was also, this neutrality was not neutral, let's put it this way. But in the Swiss culture, this kind of like idea that like we're all neutral in Switzerland is so like ingrained. And so I think a lot of the work that we do is kind of like try to crash that like myth of that anything is actually, for us, like any space, any discourse is already, it's political. It might not be overtly so, but it comes from a specific position, and that makes it political. So there's like a yearly junior design research conference happening in Switzerland that is kind of a collaboration between all the MA design programs. And we were invited to curate this year's design research conference. So it's the first time anyone invited like an outside kind of like team into doing that. And we actually attended this conference as students. And the initial goal of that conference was to create kind of connections between MA design students from different disciplines, different approaches to design research, but basically that didn't happen in our experience. It was more of kind of like a representational event of like the individual kind of departments putting forth their most cherished students and having them present their project, but there wasn't a lot of interaction going on. So we created kind of like a space where that was really working differently. We also had, we made a code of conduct, and we did like a little gender intervention with the toilets. We invited designer and researcher Vivian Tauchmann to make like she creates these like embodied kind of performances that here it was kind of like gendered movements that she asks you to do, and then only as you're doing it, you realize that what you're doing is kind of coming from a specific profession. The mornings were really led by kind of the students, and they created their own little workshops. So we broke with kind of this thing of like the students presenting their project on a big stage. We had like a long table where they actually kind of ate together and talked together. And then in the afternoon, we used also the budget that we were given to actually invite people and make space for people who are usually not kind of invited to kind of these spaces of discourse specifically in Switzerland. So we had Sepake Anjiama, curator and educator here. We had the practice Squirrel Nation from Great Britain, and we had also Clara Balaguer, cultural worker, and it was all moderated by educator and researcher Sarah Owens, and we kind of made a small event called Forms of Activism. And it was actually previously that all of that was only reserved for people from these MA programs, and we convinced the organizers to open up that programmed afternoon to the public. Right now, actually, the thing that I'm in New York for actually is a project that Nina, like a research that Nina started a couple of years ago, and we've now been continuing it together, which is within the field of kind of design history or publishing history, actually. And it started with Nikli. I don't know if a lot of you know them as a publisher, but they publish a lot of these like really influential Swiss graphic design manuals and books that are still in print today. They're on a lot of still used also in schools a lot. And they all come from this small publishing house that was actually located in one of the most conservative places in Switzerland, Appenzell. And actually Appenzell, for example, I mentioned that on a national level, women were given the right to vote in 1971, but on a local level, the two cantons of Appenzell, they're kind of split, but one of them only gave women the right to vote in 1989, and the other had to actually be forced by the courts in Switzerland to actually finally give women the local right to vote in 1991. Just to give you a context of where this publisher was situated. And what started with this like investigation into one publisher, of course, they publish a lot of other things. Now we're actually looking at a whole network of publishers, small publishers and booksellers that were working together kind of in the immediate post-war time, but also then during like Cold War time, bringing out books within like the fields of art, design, and architecture. This is us in our studio. And just I think whenever we have the moment, we use it to kind of also make a political statement. So Nina was awarded kind of a design prize in Switzerland for this research, which is, of course, also because it's a lot of, it's always a person that is often awarded. So she was, for this, we kind of like showed our research. And of course, within this research, it's also often, also in publishing, you have a lot of women that worked kind of in the background, like that in history then go by like unacknowledged, as like by this statement, these lovely ladies do all the work. This is just like, we did this kind of like short look into some of this ongoing research project during that award. And then Nina actually stepped up and like thanked for the award, but then I went up and we kind of continued it together, just to also emphasize that this is not just a one-person project. So that also to say kind of, I think in general what we try to also do is really actively change the discourse of design as well. And just as a last project quickly, this is actually Vera Sacchetti and Matilda Kriskowski. Together they form like also curatorial practice called Foreign Legion. And at the Kunstmuseum Dresden, Kunstgewerbemuseum Dresden, they held like a symposium called The Women's Work. And afterwards they were also invited by the same museum to actually make an exhibition there, for which they invited us. And the exhibition was called Add to the Cake, I think. Yeah, Add to the Cake. And we kind of proposed a library of books that should be written, but that are not yet written, from a kind of intersectional feminist perspective. And it was shown during that exhibition in this kind of like display, but it exists as a website. Everyone can actually like submit an idea for a book that should be, that someone should write. And actually doing that, it was shown also in 2 other design biennials later. And doing that, we also realized that, of course, these are not necessarily just speculative ideas. A lot of this is people proposing these ideas from a background of somewhere with a specific knowledge, or they're already working on these topics, or already working on this research. And we haven't really been promoting this website too much. It's still up, but we're actually now kind of looking into, okay, how could this also go beyond just the critical statement and actually start filling these gaps? How could we make this into a publishing platform in a way that actually not just points out these kind of like missing narratives, but actually kind of invites and also supports authors in writing these pieces and these narratives and stories. So yeah, that was, I think, all that I wanted to say, and I think it's quite long, but